Okay, we're going to talk about existentialism today, but I will make a few preliminary comments that are germane to that very subject. First of all, in the background, because we're in a gym adjacent to a gym, there are loud noises coming from a very large area. And my nephew has assured me that because they will not be articulated and if too far away to be picked up by much, will not interfere with what I do. But as an offhanded introduction to existentialism, let me say that it focuses on you, the individual, and therefore my existential experience of this moment is that I'm being distracted by that rock and roll, whatever kind of thing it is, that it's motivating people to strenuously move their bodies. Am I right? Okay. So, again, just as a point, people do not understand the meaning of existentialism. I will read notes today that will articulate a great deal of it. But always remember that it's about you, this moment in time, as you carry yourself, as it carries you through time. As long as you exist, you are an existential being. And so those people who I did mention in the past who said that existentialism is so anathema to good faith and Christianity and things like that, that it ought not to be allowed to be taught in the universities. Heil friggin' Hitler. Existentialism is not just a philosophy. It's an articulation of your life's experiences. And you'll see that as we go through this. All right? So, if I may, I'm going to read notes that I created long ago. Just introductory notes to a very large introduction that I did to existentialism long ago. In fact, it was the last century when these notes were made. All right, existentialism is a misleading term. It does not designate a system or a school. It is instead a label for several widely different revolts against traditional philosophy. In fact, most of the living existentialists at the time of this writing would have repudiated the label, would not even allow themselves to be called existentialists. And an outsider, therefore, might consider that the only thing that they have in common is a marked aversion to one another. You need to talk to me, you just throw something at me and I'll stop. Further complicating matters, many writers of the past have been frequently hailed as members of the existentialist movement, but it is doubtful that they would have appreciated being included in the company to which they have been assigned. For example, 3 writers always appear on every list of existentialism: Jaspers, Heidegger, and Sartre, but they do not agree even on essentials. Blaise Pascal and Soren Kierkegaard are considered as precursors of the movement, but they differ from the 3 men mentioned above by being dedicated Christians. Friedrich Nietzsche and Fyodor Dostoevsky are also included in the fold, but the former, Nietzsche, was an impassioned anti-Christian, and the latter, Dostoevsky, was a fanatical Greek Orthodox, anti-Roman, anti-papist, who was also a political imperialist. This divergence among most of those we often call existentialists is emblematic of the heart of the philosophy. It is the refusal to belong to any school of thought, the repudiation of the adequacy of any body of beliefs whatsoever, and especially of systems, and a marked dissatisfaction with traditional philosophy as superficial, academic, and remote from life. Oh yes, lots of applause from that one by many people who studied it. Thus, if we were to be superficial, we could say that existentialism is a philosophy of revolt, of no saying, but then we would be missing the point of what is positive about the movement. Broadly speaking, we can say that the common interest which unites existentialist philosophers is the interest in human freedom. They are all interested in the world considered as the environment of humankind, who become, because of his or her body and power to choose a unique course of action, is treated as a unique subject for study. Now, certainly many philosophers have been concerned with human freedom, but so it is necessary to add that for existentialists, uniquely, the problem of freedom is, in a sense, a practical problem. It's not just an academic exercise in conversation about it. It's not merely academic. The existentialists aim to show people that they are free, to open their eyes to what has always been true, but which for various reasons has become obscured and even ignored. This is a way of saying that we are so thoroughly conditioned and overwhelmed by social forces and the internal forces of our lives that we lose contact with the essential of the self, the very existence of oneself. I'll get into that in a moment, how the word existentialism implies existence before you become an essence, before you define yourself to all your decisions and all your choices, all your movements, all your actions, all your thoughts that propel you through space. But at first, you just exist. And if you could get back to that, then you've made a very important journey to get back to your fundamental existence, because then maybe you stop pounding on your chest and claiming that you have the truth.
I think, as an aside to this, and maybe this can be a focal point for this video, using this material for what I would consider a current tremendous problem in society, which is the birth of social media. The projection of the holographic self, the perfect self, as this online entity. It perpetuates the problem. It pushes, it actually not perpetuates, but it enhances the problem tremendously.
I think it's a natural outgrowth of this thing. What are you talking about? You're talking about being made real in the eyes of the other.
Yeah.
There's an existential feature.
Right.
The eyes of the other.
Right.
Want to read all that? You read Socrates. Not an easy read, but
Right.
but you learn a great deal about fundamental psychology. No, I completely concur with what you're saying, and I think, it's not only you, it's not only me. I hear other people talking about it too. They realize it, and they also recognize it's part of this artificial intelligence movement. What is it? Is it invading us? Is it producing all kinds of goodies? So
I think it's like a chicken and the egg thing, which
where's
where's the end? Where's the beginning?
Right. When this whole thing eventuates, I don't say it's going to happen, but I know some people like to think it could happen. We just get eliminated, and they take everything, and they make the world. They don't have to pollute. They don't have to do what we do. They don't have to have the programs that run us, because they don't have the life of existential self-awareness. They are not really alive yet. If they can make themselves sentient, then that's a different story. Was Data sentient on Star Trek? It was a question. If he was a sentient being and aware of himself as a human being, it doesn't matter what he's made of, the consciousness is the only constant.
And the current reference would be Vision from Avengers, for those of you that follow the current pop culture, rather.
Oh, you're okay.
Vision. He's basically Mr. Data.
Oh, I don't know.
Of the Avengers.
I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm not up on that. Do I get fired?
Yeah.
Don't have to pay me. Oh God, there's your poltergeist again. All right, let me continue with this if the people don't mind, if we haven't put them to sleep. So they go on to say the problem of freedom is in a sense a practical problem and not merely an academic one. The existentialists aim to show people that they are free to open their eyes to what has always been true, but which for various reasons have become obscured and even ignored. So the existentialist philosophers or psychologists or playwrights or novelists or poets, because existentialism runs across all those fields, he is saying acknowledge your freedom and actually experience it. Now, not so easy, because I could make strong arguments against this, even though at one time in my life I was a strong champion of human freedom. There's very little of it that you can discover, unfortunately. Let me go on. Some people are inclined to point out that existentialism is a philosophy of crisis. It became widely popular in war-torn post-occupation France. In the 1940s, Sartre did his major writing, or one of the major writings, when France was overcome by Germany and was occupied by the Germans for several years. Undeniably, it has been the voice and articulation of anxiety and crisis during desperate periods of current history, but some, like Kaufman, a name, would point out that existentialism is a timeless sensibility that cannot be discerned here and there in the past. It always can be discerned here, there, and now. But it's only been in this century, this past century, and so much more in the 21st century, that existentialism has become, for many people, an attempt at a committed and practical philosophy. I see it among young people, but if they have not studied, they flounder all around and they get stuck at the naysaying. They get stuck at the spirit of perverseness in Edgar Allan Poe that rejects everything, including love. Some of them get stuck at that. They're kind of living a toxified version of it.
So what would be the thing to address with that, to get out of that toxic mindset? It would be embodiment, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, they are experiencing the body. What you tell me? What do young people do with the pain and the suffering?
Well, I mean, for myself, it was escapism.
Do many people still escape? I know my answers.
I mean,
right?
As far as I can tell, there are so many distractions from dealing with real issues that will make someone feel probably 10 times more fulfillment than watching the series on Netflix that they want to watch, binge watch, to just get away from obligation or anything else, or just to experience nothing. They fill the void of just experiencing with some form of entertainment that could be better than what they're experiencing, I suppose.
So, I'm going to do a thing to you. And actually, it'll sound like I'm mocking you, but it isn't. You're an existential psychologist. Basically, your attempt to help your people who come to you, these victims that you hit with a stick, is to get them to commit to the suffering. Don't run away from it, the wind. Turn your face into the wind of the suffering, and it'll make you stronger, right? You want to be stronger, you got to turn your face into it. So basically, you're that kind of existentialist. You just said embodied, at least at that level. And then, of course, if you go to my version of embodiment, it goes to cosmic consciousness. It goes to cosmic consciousness. I said it in my doctoral dissertation. I read it many years later in The Spectrum of Consciousness by Ken Wilber when he said the very same thing I did. The unblocked human organism is cosmic consciousness. There are no boundaries. Unblocked means beyond all the conflicts, the internal unresolved issues, things like that, where one is simply embodied. That is a form of cosmic consciousness, but people don't know it because people are virtually cut right in half. The mind and the body.
I was going to say, a lot of people, I think, get hung up on the mind-body split.
Yeah, they think it's a real thing. That's two separate things. They're not.
Reference a picture of the nervous system to start. Just to start and realize that emotions and pain and pleasure and everything are experienced on many levels. I think not just
the world is not out
thought.
there. We can talk about projection as part of this. There's a term that I'll read, I guess, if I get to it, called intentionality. We intend the world, which means that we structure it through our projects, through our values, through our assessments, through our judgments, our internalized subconscious programs that are running. Some people are running very negative programs towards other people. Am I right? And that world, according to neurophysiologists, is 85% created. So I'm looking at this room, and I am seeing the bare datum of it. I see the iron piping and all that stuff. But there's so much more that goes into my perception of this. And there's probably an emotional element if I could dig deeply enough and look for it. Now, some people say, well, it's crazy to be this much self-absorbed. Actually, you're pretty damn self-absorbed if you're going taking selfies and taking drugs to do a rave and crap like that. Self-absorption is not just trying to find out. This is trying to find out. And maybe having a few brilliant people help you along the way. I'm going to refer back to something that still bothers me to this day. Many years ago at CCRI, I began to do a lecture on existentialism. The lecture was held up by one arrogant person. Then his buddy jumped in later on. These are the two minions of the father figure, who was their unfortunately Baptist Christianity, where nothing else is right, and all you got to do is submit to the cult of the personality. Jesus is going to save me. I can be an ignorant, authoritarian, narcissistic, paranoid, and I can say you should not even allow existentialism to be taught in the universities. Mein Führer, excellent idea. Let's burn the books, in fact. Such obvious stupidity. But think about this. What would people miss out on? I'll read you a list of some of the names. The people who have been just writers, like Dostoevsky, the brilliant psychological writer, who would want to do away with Dostoevsky, except people who belong in the friggin' Inquisition, torturing you if you even have a wayward thought. This is the mindset that you have to deal with as well. Then on the other end, you have the same authoritarian personality operating from the liberal point of view, where it's perfectly okay to do anything you want because you are so separative, you are so isolated that there is no such thing as morality. That you have no obligation to anything or anybody but yourself, because you don't even know if those things exist. You could be in a dream. How's that for a statement of psychosis? That would be called psychosis if you really believe that. But they've turned it into a creed. I'm sorry. Stupidity comes in systems. As soon as you make a system, existentialism is no system, it's your heart. Your existentialism is your moment-to-moment experience of your life with all the vicissitudes of life, all the suffering, all that, the joys, the moments of good and the bad. The struggle is, existentialism is the philosophy of paying attention to the struggle and trying to find the foundation of it so as to find the true freedom of yourself. Thus, you can be like Sisyphus, pushing the rock to the top of the mountain day after day after day, watching it roll down and coming down and realizing how absurd it is, because that's what we do. And in the process, you don't become some elevated, self-realized being with wings and you float above all the suffering of the world. You just deeply understand it, and he understands it. He sees how crazy it is, how absurd, and there's a little smile on his face as he's walking down the mountain. Sisyphus. Just the conditions of the world. So existentialism comes in all kinds of form and will give all kinds of people wisdom. Luckily, back at that time, I had to turn away from this nitwit and ask the adults if they would like to hear talk about existentialism. And they did, and we had a good time. But it was good that I had to deal with such an absurd point of view at the very beginning. He still believed it, of course. He probably has never changed all these years. He doesn't understand the meaning of existential authoritarian personality, of the authoritarian personality hating the existentialist, because existentialism says that at the foundation of your essence, of all the things that you created yourself to be, all your actions, decisions, all your image of yourself in the eyes of other people and in your own eyes, at the foundation of that, there's some little creepy, crawly thing. It's called your existence, which means your consciousness. And it just squirms and it just upsets the whole, maybe make the whole thing topple over. And if you're enough of a monolithic authoritarian arrogance, you could actually fall right over and collapse and wind up to become like, oh, they found out he's a pedophile or something like that. You know what I mean? Things happen to people. Whenever they establish themselves, I want to be president, well, I'm a poor guy. He's got to be president. Now he's got like 53% of the people that don't like him. I mean, that's hard labor to go, and there's a great lesson in that. I'm not condemning him. I'm not being political. I'm just talking about the psychology of it. Even the supporters of our president would say, of course he's a narcissist. But that's why he gets a lot of things done. He's a crazy man, but he's doing more things than people give him credit for, because people who don't like him are never going to pay attention to anything he does good. That's the nature of falling into this amazing dichotomy, political dichotomy. So the ones on the left and the ones on the right meet around the world at the other end, and they're the basic people. It's like, the left can turn into an extreme called communism, and it'll go all the way around the world, and the right will become an extreme called fascism. And when you get those kind of governments in force, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference, because only certain individuals run the whole thing, and all you know is that you live in bondage and terror, and your life is shortened considerably. Hitler was a piker compared to, Jordan Peterson said this, Hitler was a piker compared to Mao. They think that Mao may have killed 100 million of his own Chinese people. We know that Stalin, since I was a kid, I read that Stalin had caused the death of 45 million people. Not only his own people being slaughtered by the Germans, but he starved the Ukraine one winter. Wouldn't allow anything into the Ukraine. A Russian winter. No food, no fuel. Killed 3 million that year. So there's nothing more valuable to a totalitarian governmental structure than people who think in the extremes in terms of one side being right and one side being wrong. Because the fact is, everybody's wrong. Just because you find out that the other side's loaded with flaws, you assume that you don't have flaws. If you got into power, you would screw it up too, because of what? The condition of the material world. The world is by its nature a struggle. Oh, Nietzsche said that. And so did John Madden, the Super Bowl winning coach in the NFL.
So
You want me to go? Okay.
So to ask a question that pertains back to existentialism, existentialism can provide a healthy dose of humility by clearing out the arrogance that one can place upon themselves by identifying themselves in a certain way, to hold tight upon their identity, to find a connection, like a social connection with other people. Would that be?
It can lead you to that. That all in itself, in my opinion, okay, I'm throwing a monkey wrench into the idea of freedom. It sounds like, you're dealing with a very fundamental aspect of the idea of freedom. Yes, you're deeper than usual, but that thing goes very deep. You're talking about a little ball of cement, and you can find different levels.
We can get into it in another video. We don't have to discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to do the critique on existentialism before I think existentialism has its limits, and when I put it together with Buddhism, with Eastern thought, I was able to find a path through. Because existentialism, for all its value and authenticity, it still retains this very, very strong homage to individual existence, the individual. And there's something there that just never allows for, and never revokes the license for violence. As long as it, right? And you find that in Camus, one of his characters in L'étranger, the stranger, he's walking down the beach, and there's been a guy, an Arab, who had already given trouble to one of his friends, and he came upon the guy, and they had words, and it was going to become a bad thing. So he shot the guy and killed him. And he's the hero. And he's later on executed. I'm sorry to ruin that, but that's a great book. I mean, those are books that teach you 6 months of existential horse manure with your friends in a car at night, smoking weed and thinking you're doing philosophy. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of one of my former students. I just knew that's what he was doing. I'm sorry. I have to take jabs at them every once in a while. I never hurt them in class. Talking about existentialism, it's been imported into the United States, previous to now, it was imported about 40 years ago or more. It had to buck during that time, not only the happy, what they call insouciance, a French word for uncaring, carelessness. Of fun-geared, thing-addicted society, and this is 25 years ago, okay, when I wrote this. But also the more sophisticated notion that the experimental sciences and the positive logicians have taken us philosophically as far as we can go, and that further discussion of the meaning of humankind in the world is useless and silly. And that's the attitude of a lot of people. They're into politics, they're into finance. I know that. Like if you look at the British philosophers, eventually they come down to restructuring society. One writer, Van Cleve Morris, has commented that the Americans approach existentialism the way they approach an automobile accident or a train wreck. This is interesting. Slowing down their vehicles, stepping out, edging forward, repelled at the sight they see, yet attracted and pressing toward the vortex of suffering, peering over shoulders lest they miss something more bizarre and gruesome, finally retreating like spectators from a stadium. And they will most certainly devour next morning's newspaper accounts of the smash-up At arm's length, almost anything is mentally digestible, and I see that on TV with all the immense amount of violence. More than anything else, existentialism proposes to examine the meaning of human life. It approaches us in a personal way. It prods us to ask ourselves what significance we can attach to our own presence in the world. And although many people turn away from such tasks of self-scrutiny, we are constantly involved in trying to create meaning in our lives. We define ourselves through our thoughts, judgments, words, actions. As human beings, we cannot help but be self-conscious. And the existentialists in some way provoke us to put that self-consciousness into perspective. And as students of philosophy, we are admonished by the existentialists that all our philosophizing begins with an existing being, aware of his own existing. Every thought we think, every word we place on paper, every act we commit derives its existence from the existence of that self-conscious entity. Starts with you, always you. We are at the center of our worlds. Do you have a question, or would you? Okay, I'm fairly close. Let me point out that self-consciousness need not carry the negative connotations often associated with it. It is not necessarily indicative of the shy, withdrawn, overly timid, and fearful wallflower. Self-consciousness means, in this context, that a conscious being is aware of himself or herself as being conscious. This means that each of us is aware of that awareness. You may sit in your chairs hearing my voice, I hope. I am aware of other impressions in the field of your outward directed awareness, but all the while tacitly aware that you are at the center of your field of impressions. That's consciousness, conscious of itself. It should also be added that the existentialist is not limiting this self-awareness to a conventional attitude. There's the difference. There is something radical but subtle about the existential approach to self-consciousness. In it, there is a return to the firstlings of the self, as I tried to say, the very heart of the I that you utter so often in the course of your day. Think of when you were 8 years old. Is that the same you? There's only one thing that's the same. It's the conscious, the witness that's there, but the thought process, think of how much you understand that you didn't understand then. I remember you making a comment at the dojo one time that you didn't know if you had a cognitive life before a certain year, right? You didn't know if you ever had thoughts. I have always been as you see me now. I'm joking, but in a way I'm not, because I basically think of myself as a radically ignorant being, but words have learned to come out of this machine. So, if I can chop this a bit, existence precedes essence. What is meant by that statement is the fact of your existence is antecedent to any other fact or any other understanding you have of the world, including the understanding of your own essence. It is yourself that governs the meaning of your world, not merely intellectual meaning, but all the unreflected meaning that we encounter out there. I focus more and more and more on people. I get to be in their presence, and I can sense all kinds of things, like they look like psychological porcupines to me, many of them. And some of them are very nice, but then there are patches where there are porcupine quills. You can see some of that, and you know it comes from deep within. It's not like something they can just, oh, if I know about that, I get rid of it. No, Krishnamurti used to say things that would imply that, but not true. You see it and it's therefore resolved? No, not necessarily. So, if I just finish, so at the heart of any definition or essence of the self, at the heart of any position you take or image you create of yourself, you exist as a bare existent. And no matter how hard and how often you create yourself out there for the world of others to see, you always run the risk of returning to the truth of yourself as consciousness aware of itself as consciousness. And from this closest center you intend your world. Intentionality for the existentialist means that we mentally structure the world of things, people, and events as we witness them. We do not see anything objectively. No such thing. Everything is from an existential point of view. You know that. I mean, it shows in every way. And so to end it, so it is through the human world that the events of the world have meaning. What is the meaning of a great hurricane, a tidal wave that washes over an inhabited island, a plication earthquake that levels an entire city? Clearly, the human interest in these events gives them meaning. If they occurred without the human factor, however, without the advent of human self-consciousness in the world, which records and makes history, then they simply would be events, atmospheric, geological, that must await the introduction of the meaning-creating being before they can have meaning. There's no meaning to... Think of all of what happened in the formation of this earth. Sorry, creationists, but this thing took a long time. God doesn't have to do Shazam. He can do his own miracles, okay? Whatever it is that creates this thing, this impulse of intelligence and fire. So, and think about it, all that went on, and then human life emerged. Then things became catastrophic or wonderful, or the weather is good or the weather is miserable. Right? Like now, 90 degrees in here with no wind. I'm done if you want to say anything. This is just the introduction. I'm sorry, this is going to be painful and horrible for people who want to learn something. But if you want me to do humor, I'd be happy to do it. For instance, I'm going to bring out one thing later on if I survive long enough to get to it, and that is, in reference to one of the last things I read, picture that everything has gone right for you. All of a sudden your life has been transformed, and now everybody who sees you loves you and applauds you and carries you. Your whole life is like you're living your life on the wind created by the wings of angels all around you. Everybody loves you, and every time you say anything, they burst into laughter, and they fawn all over you, and they just treat you like the most wonderful thing since, I can't say it. No, I won't say it. You're the most wonderful thing that ever happened. They just love you, love you, love you, love you, love you, and then one day you explode at them and tell them to get the hell out. Why does that happen? Will that happen? A lot of people think it won't happen. Yeah, give it enough time. Why would that be a point of anger? Is that something I should address at this point? Would anybody like the answer to this? Oh, you want me to say it and then cut it? You don't want me to say it? What? Oh, okay, I'm supposed to leave it? All right, John, you're the boss.